We are gathered here today to talk about the Microenterprise Home Kitchen Operations Law, AB 626, which was passed by the state legislature in 2018, became the law of the state January 1st, 2019, but it is an enabling law. It allows counties and cities, jurisdictions that have their own environmental health department or operation, to opt in to this law. There was an article in the LA Times on January 2nd or 3rd, 2019. We have this new law. Why is no one cooking or likely to be cooking soon? And it was all about opting in. We knew it would be a sort of slow process. We had no idea quite how slow it would be. We're approaching 3 years, and 8 of the 62 jurisdictions in California have opted in. And the state of Utah followed with the same law, which became in effect in September. So, for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Peter Ruddick, and I am the Policy Director for Cook Alliance. We are the sponsors of this law. We worked with Assemblyman Eduardo Garcia, he's from Palm Desert, to get this law passed in 2017 and 18. It took 2 years to go through the legislature. In the end, it went through unanimously, but it got amended in a number of ways during the process, including over our objections, the county opt-in. When it was first proposed, there was no county opt-in, but it was insisted and we had to accept it, and that's why we're doing this all these years later. We as a nonprofit didn't actually exist in 2017. We were a function, and I was not an employee. We were a function of a for-profit called Josephine, which was the first platform to try to help cooks sell. Josephine ran out of money and isn't in business. There are 300 or so platforms trying to do this now, and Josephine isn't one of them. But the advocacy group that it created became the nonprofit Cook Alliance. We're going to be about 3 years old. In January, we'll be 3 years old. So, I have this little outline about things to talk about, and basically each page is one topic. So what I want to do is go through each page for you, from the timeline to what is Amico to the issues that we're dealing with and what a campaign looks like, and we'll stop at the bottom of each page for questions about that page. When we get to the end of this, we can go into a conversation and talk about anything and nuts and bolts and who's going to do what and how long it takes. So I told you a little bit about the timeline. So the next page is a little bit more detail about the timeline, and it shows the 8 counties that have opted in. I mentioned that the law became in effect January 1st, 2019. The environmental health departments had been talking with us in 2017 and stopped talking in 2018. Environmental health is far from monolithic. There are people in there who think this is a great law and people in there who think it's a horrible law. And at the state level, they were talking with us at first until they took a poll or vote among the whole state, and the majority of them didn't want the law, and so their policy folks stopped talking with us. When the law passed unanimously in the legislature, environmental health said, well, if we had been engaging, we would have required the following changes. So the third line down, AB 377, was a cleanup bill sponsored by the environmental health departments. It was signed and took effect immediately on October 7th, 2019. You'll notice that exactly one county, Riverside, didn't wait for the cleanup bill. And it is in some ways a political thing. The author of the law was Assemblyman Eduardo Garcia from Palm Desert. He had been, before he went to the Assembly, a supervisor for Riverside County. And the Riverside County current supervisors were his former colleagues and friends, and he was able to tell them, the way I'm telling you, in a personal fashion, why he championed the law and why Riverside should go first. And he was also the author of the cleanup law, and Cook Alliance ended up being a co-sponsor. We liked what the health departments proposed, all the technical things they proposed. Wish they'd done it earlier, but politics are politics. And Riverside said, oh, we want to get started. We trust that we're going to like what's in the bill. Most of the other counties said, we're going to wait for the cleanup bill. And they did. So the bill passed. Riverside was permitting cooks. There are 150 of them in Riverside County now. And the second thing that a lot of the other counties said is, we want a year of data from Riverside. We want to see how they're doing it. And they collected the data, the Environmental Health Department, the supervisors, and the Cook Alliance, and we shared the data with the other counties. And Lake County, whom I work with, they went third. Imperial, being Riverside's neighbor, was also in Assemblyman Garcia's district, was able to work with their neighbors. They were the first ones to look at the data from Riverside and say, hey, this is a wonderful start. We can do it too. And we have found that the rural counties like Imperial and Lake really like this, because whatever we in a urban county might worry about local economy and unemployment and the benefits of this law, they sort of double in the rural counties. They had more unemployment issues before the pandemic and got hit really hard in the pandemic. So it wasn't until this year that we started getting the bottom of this, that we started getting more suburban and urban counties to opt in. And the fact that Riverside went first and went early and had this year of data, and we're still collecting data, looking at it in different ways, has been really important. We expect any other county that's looking at this to ask what has already happened. So hopefully in January, February, I'm going to add a 9th line to this, which is going to say San Diego. They are going to hear an ordinance in January. No guarantee they're going to pass an ordinance in January. These things sometimes get kicked back for more research. There will be opposition, as we're going to talk about in the next couple of pages. But they have asked upfront for all of that data, and they have 2 champions on the board, 2 people who are already ready to vote yes. Most boards of supervisors are 5, and a majority is all that's needed to pass it. We'd really like everybody to be on board, but you need a champion and 2 yeses, and then you could have 2 noes. The champions were really excited. They asked us for all that data. They asked Riverside for all that data, and they've been really excited to have that data. So I want to stop at the bottom of each page for questions on that. So sort of the timeline that I just outlined, what's happened over the last couple of years. Anything that is confusing or that I missed, ask me about that, and then we'll go on to the other topics.
For the data part, are we, if an interested county, would they ask Riverside for it, or would we ask you guys to look and find?
Both.
Okay.
We have some, and Riverside has some. And we have done studies and are doing more studies. We're going to talk about nuisance issues and the concerns about those. And we actually did that study. We think it's pretty good. But within the county, the health department, they have their own issues and that they've studied. And there are no foodborne illness issues in California, nor with cottage food. In the last 30 years has there ever been a food poisoning issue from a cottage food operator. Cottage food is the related bill. It's not on the timeline. It's shelf-stable things. The 2 categories of which are most common are baked goods and jams and jellies. And that, we didn't collect those statistics. They're out there from a couple of allied nonprofits. is a big deal that Pennsylvania passed that law in 1975, the Cottage Food law, and there's never been a food poisoning issue traced back to a cottage food operator. Now, the health departments will tell you cottage foods are picked to be particularly safe, and they're absolutely right. Bread and high-acid jam cannot grow botulism, and that is a concern of all food, and we think it's built into the law. There's very little botulism left in the United States in the food system, but it does happen, and it happens in both inspected facilities and in home cooking. The last major outbreak was a church potluck in Ohio a couple of years ago, and somebody did die from home canned potato salad, which is not allowed under either of the home cooking laws. If you're a cottage food operator or a micro-enterprise home kitchen operation, MEHKO, that's the acronym we're using, you're not allowed to home can and sell potato salad because it is too risky a food, and we agree with the health department on that. You want to buy canned potato salad, it has to be made in an inspected facility.
That's not a follow-up question. For the data collected, what kind of data is collected? Like the perfect type of whether cooking problem?
Let's come back to that later, because I'm going to talk about 3 sets of issues, and it'll give you an idea. So the next page is still more sort of setup. What is Amico? And then the following 3 pages are the issues that we've heard about and are tracking, and therefore that need data. So at the end of 4 more pages, if it isn't clear, that'll be the place to dive in and say what I missed or what I didn't state very well.
I caught it missing. So the first year there was just 1 county,
Just
the
one.
second one, 2 counties that were very close to Riverside. What happened this third year that we had 5 counties? What was the big jump? From 2 to 5. What happened there was different?
So many things happen in a 4-month period. They weren't talking to each other. It was coincidence in a way. There have been many things that influenced us. There was the follow-up law. There was the desire to have data. And there was the pandemic. And at the beginning, we didn't quite know how to answer the pandemic. The first thought from all of the counties is we're too busy to look at something which is tangential. At most, it touches on the pandemic. People need to eat. But then as unemployment among restaurants, it looked less tangential because the unemployed people were starting to cook without a permit and would be better if they were educated and had a permit. And as the counties got their COVID response, their pandemic response under control, more or less happened by the end of 2020, and they understood that this wasn't as tangential as they thought, that it was an appropriate COVID response, then they started looking at it more seriously.
So it's the framing of the kind of like the.
We didn't frame at the beginning that this was a COVID response because we didn't fully see
I'm
that.
thinking for us, like what we can do. We
Now,
can frame it like
now we can frame it as a COVID response. The food industry, the restaurant industry especially, has not recovered. People are doing this. They are doing it mostly safely. We are not hearing about it. But if we educate and regulate, they will be even safer, and they will pay taxes, and they will know not about nuisances and not bothering their neighbors, and it will get them employment in a time when we're still recovering from the pandemic-induced recession. We strongly believe this to be true. This is what we are seeing. Okay, so starting in Pennsylvania in the 70s and in California in 2013, you are allowed to make what has become known as cottage food, shelf-stable law food. But what is Amico? Amico is a home cook who sells fresh food, a meal. The definition of a meal isn't an entree and 2 sides. In fact, you don't have to sell an entire meal. The definition of a meal, the closest we could come to one, is that it is sold to be eaten on the day that it was made. Okay. So people talk about the tamale lady. A tamale isn't a whole meal, it would probably be the entree, you're going to have something with it, but many of the tamale ladies just sell tamales. They make it in the afternoon, they sell it for dinner. It's a meal. How many tamales is a meal? 1, 2, an order. We don't overly sweat what a meal is, but a meal, as far as we are concerned, is food to be eaten the day it was made. We argued a little bit over this. An overnight marinade for a dish can be so important. The law ended up getting written that you can start the marinade at 12:01 a.m. And we said, oh, come on. If they're going to sell it at 6 p.m. for dinner on Wednesday, they can start it at 6:01 on Tuesday. No. 12:01 a.m., same day. Well, we can regulate. There's no way we can be in every MEHKO's kitchen at night, so some of them may start it at 6:01. The law can and should only get so picky. But basically, it's to be made the day before. So people ask about cottage food. Well, I'm not allowed to make an apple pie as a cottage food operator. Can I make one as Amico? Yes and no. You can make a pie and cut a slice and serve it as a dessert as part of a meal if it was made that day. But you cannot put it in a box and sell it as a cottage food operator or as Amico, because you're not allowed to do shelf-stable food. You're not allowed to sell things that aren't made that day. Can I make sauerkraut? Sauerkraut takes a week or more to ferment. It must be sold the day it is made. Sauerkraut cannot be made in a day. So no. Certain hazardous foods, anything that needs pressure canning or has a risk of botulism. So fish stock, potato salad. Again, you're canning them, so they're probably going to fail for two reasons. One, they're not sold the day they were made, but they're also going to be put in a can for sale on other days. And they're also not, they're riskier foods. You're not allowed to do sushi. You're not allowed to do raw milk products. You're not allowed to do a few other things that need a HACCP plan, a hazard and its analysis and control points plan, because they are thought to be too risky. And if you buy these foods that are made in a commercial kitchen, that commercial kitchen will have to have extra regulation over and above what other commercial kitchens would have, because they are making a hazardous food. So there will be gradients, but the health department is going to divide the food world into three. Not risky foods, or non-potentially hazardous. Those are the breads and jams. Potentially hazardous. Those are the things that Amico can sell, and then hazardous, things that need a HACCP plan. So Amico can not make anything that is hazardous that needs a HACCP plan. So some of these foods are going to fail both on the I'm preserving them and they're hazardous. When Amico sets up, they have to give their menus to the health department and say what they're going to serve, and the health department will go through that I just said and say, oh, that's not permitted. The rest of it is. But the health department, as part of the permitting process, wants to know what you're going to cook, so they can tell you if it's actually allowed as Amico or not. All right, so MEHKOs have limits. 30 meals per day, which is actually fairly high, 60 per week. We do have a number of the early adopter MEHKOs who are doing weekend pop-up restaurants. We hear that MEHKOs are incubators, people trying out to get a brick and mortar restaurant in the future, and that's true. But it's not the only thing. In Riverside County, we have a stay-at-home mom. She has an adult autistic son, and she's always wanted a home job. But we also have other people who like to do this and only want to do it on the weekends. They could do 30 meals Saturday and Sunday. More common are some of the people who are doing 8 to 10 meals 4 days a week, and they're not hitting either of these limits. The limit of $50,000 per year, which is adjusted for inflation, let's just say it's pulled out of a hat. People said we won't want it to get so big that it'll be unsafe, but we don't know an exact metric. And there's some argument that dollar metric isn't the way to go. But we have heard of 2 cottage food operators. Cottage Food has a limit, and of course not everybody honors it, that were both making, when audited, over $1 million a year out of their home bakeries. They were both bakeries.
Oh my gosh.
The one in Phoenix was having 40 delivery trucks a day pick up bread from their home to...
With their one full-time employee? I want to see that operation.
Yeah.
You have a number of things going on. You have people now who are doing this and not knowing or caring that there's a law. There will be people who will get a permit and then they'll violate certain things. So they had more than one employee.
I imagine. Or robots.
They weren't caught. They were annually inspected. I don't know, maybe they only saw what was in the kitchen and not the secondary pseudo kitchen in the garage. When the neighbors started complaining about the traffic and somebody didn't audit. The idea is that we don't want the business to get too big. If you want to get that big, you need to have a commercial facility for 2 reasons. One is food safety. There is going to come a point where at home you've gotten too big to be safe. And strictly speaking, you're not allowed to make 1 loaf of bread in the garage. It must be in your kitchen. But there's also the neighborhood nuisance. The neighbors expecting that they're in a residential neighborhood and that home businesses tend to be quiet, like tax preparers, piano teachers, small home-based food operations don't want customers in at all hours. Are these the right answers? There's a hint that they're too conservative. We just passed an amendment to the cottage food law after 9 years. It also had a $50,000 cap. On January 1st, that cap goes up to $150,000 because there wasn't in 9 years a single complaint about nuisance issue from Cottage Food. Should Cottage Food and MEHKO have the same cap? Not necessarily, because Cottage Food doesn't have dining. You're buying shelf-stable food like a loaf of bread or a jar of jam. Whereas a MEHKO can do delivery, which the neighbors won't necessarily see unless there are 40 delivery trucks, or pickup. And if you have 40 different people picking up, that could become a nuisance. Although people often pick up for a family and they've ordered for 3, 4, 5 meals, so you get 1 pickup. Or dine-in, which hasn't grown as big as expected because of the pandemic. And permitted MEHKOs follow whatever the county's COVID rule is. So if restaurants can't dine in, neither can MEHKOs. If restaurants are only outside, so are MEHKOs. There are some that do dine in. We had a great grand opening for Alameda County's MEHKO #1 in his backyard. He does Saturday barbecue in the backyard for no more than 30 people. I recommend it if you want to do this in person. Get a Saturday barbecue lunch at Grill EQ in San Leandro. Team visit. I will introduce you to Lee. I'll put the article. We made a little bit of a deal out of it. We invited film crews and the Chronicle, and they did a great article about the grand opening. So there's an article about Grill EQ's grand opening, September 11th, in the Chronicle. Safety is paramount. We have always understood that. You need a food manager certificate. If you have employees, and employees tend not to be full-time, this is a 1-person operation, but if you have a bigger event, if a group meeting says we want to bring all 30 people, the cook may not be able to handle it, they can get a temporary employee but that employee must have a food handler certificate. They must at least prove that they know that much about food safety. And food safety is always paramount, and if we find that it isn't safe in some way, if there's a pattern, then we want to make it safer. We understand that, we appreciate that. Some of the health departments say this isn't safe enough. Some of them say we have a separate hand washing sink. Every kitchen should have one. To which I respond, if you go into a restaurant or commercial kitchen, you have half a dozen employees, and often there's somebody washing dishes constantly. If you only have one sink, how could the rest of them do a quick hand wash? If you're Amico and there's one of you, if you're washing dishes, your hands are wet. If you're not washing dishes, the sink is free. All right, and so the scale of this and the other laws, the other regulations that aren't in this page, going to the business which has these kinds of limitations, the size limitations, the food limitations, is that some of the things in a multi-person kitchen are not relevant. Are these regulations different than a commercial kitchen? Yes, but in a well thought out way that they maintain safety in a home operation. All right, so the next page is going to dive a little bit more into that. But I'll stop. And do you have any questions on the what is Amico before we go in a little bit more into food safety?
I do have one question. In the case of an audit, who does the audit of the I would imagine the Department of Health for the actual commercial kitchen audit, the home kitchen, but for the income limits, who's
The health department. They don't
Same.
terribly want to do that,
Right,
but
okay.
they would be the
In
ones to
case
do it.
there was-
Yeah. So the MEHKOs are required to keep all of their receipts. Will they? Well, if they got an audit because there's an apparent problem and they didn't keep their receipts, that's a problem. They need to pay taxes, and if they're going to get permitted with the county, presumably they're going to pay taxes. The ones who are running currently without a permit also don't have a business license, also don't have a tax certificate number. They aren't paying anybody anything. They are moving money through our economy because they're selling things, but the city, the county, and the state aren't getting any of it because they're totally underground. And that, to us, is also an advantage of becoming a legal business. We can regulate them, which can be important. We can educate them, which is we're going to get to is very important. And they pay taxes. I actually know some of the unpermitted ones pay federal income tax on their illegal business.
Is the food manager certificate, that's already something that has a system in place with the county, or that's something we have to develop? So it's already
No,
in
it
place?
exists.
Okay.
So there's a national standard called ServSafe, ServSafe, that offers both the handler and the manager. It's a couple-hour course and an all-day course. I took the food manager. I recommend it to anybody who handles food, and I am only an occasional, usually at events. I have been the assistant cook at the fundraiser here on 3 or 4 occasions, cooking in there one year. I had a food manager certificate.
And we offer through our Eastside Burning program here, which is familiar with assistance with that, getting people signed up for ServSafe training.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna ask.
That's part of the
So before we go on to the next one, the MEHKO, the cost of setting up. If you were to open a brick and mortar restaurant, you would expect to spend $250,000. And if you've never run a restaurant and you're taking a little bit of a risk, that's a lot of money to risk. If you were to open a food truck or a regular operation in somebody else's commercial kitchen, which is not as easy as some people make it sound, you might still expect to spend $50,000 to $75,000 setting up an official business in an inspected commercial kitchen. As a place for incubation, as well as a place for those people who only want to work part-time or want to work at home, like the stay-at-home mom I mentioned. This is not free, but it is affordable. The permits from the health department vary from county to county. The county is required by state law to recover the cost of permitting. And each of the counties that have opted in have determined that cost on their own way, partially by local expenses. You won't be surprised to hear that Lake, a small rural county, doesn't have the expenses of Alameda. Lake only charges $256 for the permit. Alameda charges $691. All of the other counties are in between those two numbers. That's what you pay the health department to review your menu, to review your plan, to inspect your kitchen, to get you in the system. It takes the health department, they figure, 3 to 4 hours to do that. And the urban departments bill out at about $150 an hour, which is why the $600 range is normal. If you're in a city, you'll need a business license. That tends to run $60 to $70. The tax permit from the state is a registration, it's free. The food manager certificate, which can be gotten from many, many places, runs about $125 and it's good for 5 years. Some jurisdictions have like an extra home occupancy certificate, which is something above and beyond a business license. It tends to be $20, $30 just a registration. And then you should get insurance. The law doesn't and couldn't require it, but cottage food operators and MEHKOs are both getting insurance. It's, I think, surprisingly affordable. It's about $200 per year. When I first asked people for temporary events like the Vegelution fundraiser, what food insurance is going to cost, and of course the health departments are telling you how risky food is. And we actually got into this absurd argument down in Santa Barbara County where a supervisor said this is an uninsurable thing because food is so dangerous. It's $200 a year. And when you ask the insurance agents who know anything about this, how come it's so cheap? Well, food's not dangerous. And that's the funniest thing, that the insurance people think it's not dangerous and other people think it's so dangerous. So all told, the startup costs for MEHKO are going to be about $1,000. The permit, the health department permit, is renewable every year by most counties. A county can waive that or can go every other year. Insurance is obviously yearly. Business licenses don't have to be renewed in most jurisdictions. And the food manager's card is 5 years. So your second year will be a little cheaper than the first year, but at about $1,000 to get started. And actually think that's good. We talk about, we thought we had 40 signups per day. As a volunteer organizer, I know that when you have a free event, you expect no more than 50% of people to show up because, oh, I'll sign up, but it has no value. You charge them $10, which we're not going to do for a little political campaign meeting, but you charge them $10 and your show up rate goes up to about 90% because I paid, I better show up. Well, the idea that you've put $1,000 into this, that people are telling you that small business, home business, but still serious business, and we're going to give you inspection, regulation, and education, gets people to take it more seriously. So we hear that there are people, lower income people, who can't afford $1,000. Supervisor Canepa in San Mateo actually got a grant fund for the county, and he is going to give grants to people who can't afford it. Most counties aren't going to do that. Cook Alliance, small nonprofit, is looking to set up a grant fund, a scholarship fund. If you need help with that $1,000 getting permitted, somebody's going to help you. So far, we're giving credit to Supervisor Canepa. Daly City, he got $625,000 and put it in a scholarship fund. He loves this program. Okay. So, next page is the health departments. And I've already mentioned about them. Food safety is paramount. Health department has been involved at some level, will always be involved. This does not mean they are all happy. When the county opt-in was put in, it was put in because one of the supervisors in Mendocino County said, we're too poor a county, we can't afford this. His colleagues have said, we love it. Not enough of them to get Mendocino to pass it yet. But of course we can afford it. It's fee for service. It's only, about a $50,000 startup cost to put the regulations, the website, to train the inspector. We can afford that. That's the one and only non-recoverable cost. But once there's opt-in, and even though the state health department helped write the regulations and the policy arm of the state health department has said, we agree now that it's safe enough, individual county health officers are still saying it isn't safe enough for us yet, or we at least want to watch other counties for a few more years. Okay. Who was the most outspoken health department against this until last year? Santa Clara. Our former DEH director, he and I were actually both on the podium in 2018 at the Senate Health Committee hearing. And he said there is no way that home cooks could ever sell food safely. You couldn't tweak this law enough. It's impossible. And he was on record, and he was the opposition. Emily alerted me a couple months ago that he has moved on. We know that the supervisors are interested. We have seen in other counties where the health department said, I don't know if it's safe enough. I don't know if we should do it. If you're asking me, let's not do it. To which the supervisor often said, I think we need it for the economic reasons. We can look at Riverside and it is safe enough. If you put your energy in, we can make it safe enough. And so we've had, with health departments across the state, health officers who are really in favor of this. In Santa Barbara County, the health department liked this. They were with us the whole time, and in San Diego they are too. In Lake County, they were on the fence, and it was Supervisor Crandall who pushed them onto this side, said, we can do it, you can do it, I know you can. The supervisors are effectively the boss in the county org chart of the health department. And the supervisor says, we can do it even though you're concerned about it, and we can put in some extra guardrails. This law doesn't allow the counties to have too much leeway, but there are some leeway. San Mateo put it in as a pilot project. 2 years, we'll reevaluate it. And given that Riverside is 2.25 years in and loves it to pieces, I can't imagine San Mateo finding anything, but if they do, they've already hinted to the public that 2 years from now they might shut it off, that it's a pilot. Lake said we're going to go slowly. The first year we're only going to top out at 10 permits. It's a small rural county. They've only had half a dozen. But ways to ease into it. The supervisor champion is usually looking in a bigger purview than the health department. The health department is worried about food safety, and the supervisor says it's already happening, this will change enforcement costs, it's not causing a problem, but this will make it even safer. It's a good COVID response. And we still end up having that argument. The health department folks, they're intrinsically cautious people. They're human beings. The vast majority of them, I've met them, are good human beings, but they're intrinsically cautious people. And so they are worried about these kinds of issues. They're worried that the safety things we talked about on What Is Amico aren't quite safe enough. And so the thing to do is to get statistics, the Cottage Food statistics, which isn't a perfect parallel, the CDC study from 2018 with foodborne illness that actually showed a foodborne illness outbreak is when 5 or more people get sick from the same place. And it doesn't have to do with sales. So the church potluck in Ohio was a home-caused food or an illness outbreak. One woman died of botulism and 19 other people went to the hospital. Fortunately, botulism, there's an antitoxin now, they all recovered. But per capita, per that study, first of its kind, inspected restaurants are just as likely to cause foodborne illness. That is a thing you need to be very careful to say in front of health inspectors. It isn't proven, but it can imply that much of what they're doing is not having effect on one metric, that kind of illness. And that may be true. There need to be more studies. No one is talking about abolition of health departments. We're talking about that they need to think that there are other ways and that there are guardrails built into this, and that even some of the things they're doing. The last time I got food poisoning, I started mentioning a story. It was in a Morgan Hill counter-serve restaurant. I started mentioning the story to my friend who was the head restaurant inspector in San Mateo County. He interrupted me halfway through the story, and he finished the story perfectly, to which he said, "Yeah, I wish we could regulate that part of a restaurant." What? Yes. And as we know, we've been masking up for the last not quite 2 years. One of the biggest methods of transition for common cold and annual flu is restaurants, and perhaps especially counter serve. I know that 7-8 years ago, I got a cold because I lingered talking to a cashier at a counter serve restaurant who had a cold. I should have stayed back. I should have moved on, said I'll talk to you next week. And so we get into these discussions that, yes, we believe in food safety. Yes, many of the things that the health department is doing are good, but the health department isn't perfect and there are other ways to do it. And we want to work with you. We want the cooks to be permitted, inspected, regulated, and we think most importantly, educated. So the health department will educate them during the inspection and during the menu review. The food handler manager certificates will educate them while they're getting certified. And Cook Alliance is starting to provide tools to help educate them for holes that these other education isn't covering. And so that is our response to people who say it isn't safe enough, as well as statistics. Go talk to Riverside. They love it. All right, so before we go on to the next page, any other questions, any thoughts about health issues? Okay, so city and nuisance issues. This wasn't a big deal at first. Cities, other than the 4 that have their own health departments, strictly speaking, have no say in this. The supervisors decide, the health department regulates. The cities are then, and they talk about this as an unfunded mandate, arguably not democratic from their point of view, have to regulate nuisances. They can collect business licenses, which can pay for the nuisance regulation. Nobody in Riverside was worried, and we didn't hear about any issues, and nobody was collecting statistics. And it turns out they're sort of hard to collect. And when you talk to the cities that are worried, and you say, give me an example of a nuisance that an unpermitted MEHKO or a permitted food truck has, the vast majority of cities' record keeping is so bad that they can't give you an example. They're just afraid. So what we did recently, and we have more studies in the works, but the easiest one to pass was we asked through a Public Records Act request for complaints on all registered MEHKOs in Riverside County over the previous year. In an estimated 100,000 meals, we found 2 complaints. 2 of the 150 MEHKOs had a complaint. We investigated those 2 complaints deeper. One of them happened before the MEHKO was permitted. that the complaint was on their address, but before they were permitted, the complaint from their neighbors was that they were deep frying in the backyard and it stank. They are not allowed as a permitted MEHKO. When they came in, the health department said, you can become permitted, but you have to move it into the kitchen because you're not allowed to cook on the patio unless you're barbecuing. They did become permitted. They did move into the kitchen. They have not been a problem since. The other issue, the only one that happened to a permitted MEHKO, was the law says you are not allowed to advertise on your property, and they put an 8x11 placard in the window saying, we sell food. And a neighbor complained, and they got a phone call from the health department, said you have to take your sign down, it's not in the law. Oh, we didn't know, they took the sign down, fixed. The food manager certificate, the inspection, the health department's concerned only about health. Didn't mention the sign. I know it's in the law, but nobody told the home cook. So Riverside Health Department added that as a brief comment to the cook. Because, oh, maybe we could have told them that because no one else is, so the education gets better. 100,000 meals, only 2 issues, easily fixed. And they didn't even, Riverside didn't even fine either of them because they were such small, fixable issues.
The business hours, I don't know if you mentioned this. Are there set business hours or a range of?
Cities are not allowed to make MEHKO specific zoning laws, but some cities already say that any kind of business has to be within a certain number of hours. Often 8 to 8 is a common range, but it varies from city to city. You wouldn't want your next door neighbor teaching piano at 2 a.m. Hard to imagine a 10-year-old who's available for piano lessons at 2 a.m., but you wouldn't want it. We did hear of one unpermitted MEHKO in Santa Monica who decided that she could give lunch to the all-night Caltrans crew that maintained Highway 101 on the beach. Her neighbors didn't like it. They didn't like the whole law. I told her they aren't permitted, couldn't be permitted, and if they were, the law would actually get them quicker, and this is how you complain about them. I don't know if she ever did. But any number of people write to me and say, I don't like the law because of. What you're describing wouldn't be allowed under the law, and it would make it easier for you to stop the people who are doing that if we had the law. So if you're causing a nuisance issue, traffic, noise, odors, parking, garbage, the city already has laws about those. People worry, oh, there'll be so much garbage. Well, the thing is, 60 meals a week, a family of 4 actually already makes 84 meals a week, or eats them if they're eating out. But in the pandemic, we're eating out so much less. And when they're educated, they're very concerned about generating garbage. When you run the numbers on these things, they're not as big as the people are afraid of. And so that's why we have these kind of numbers. And people are afraid of all sorts of things. Well, what about Americans with Disability Act? A friend of mine helped write that law. She actually wrote us an opinion. She wasn't a lawyer, she was a disability advocate. The people who wrote that law in 1990 exempted all home businesses. You should make accommodation, but you don't have to. And we have heard of lawsuits for brick and mortar businesses. There's been one going around in Mountain View, Palo Alto. It's bound to have crossed your office.
Yeah, this is one firm that's targeting all these small businesses.
They tend to be frivolous laws because they're calculated to be the amount of money asked for is slightly less than winning the lawsuit would cost. But these things, they happen in San Diego. They're usually not a business violating the ADA. And so it is possible that somebody is going to think that a home business is a target. We're actually looking into that and ready to help them defend. But the same friend who wrote the opinion tried to get brick and mortar restaurants to fight them in that she was actually the director of disability access for the state of Hawaii, ran a 22-person office, said, we will be behind you and pro bono attorney will be there. It will cost you nothing because we think these frivolous lawsuits are hurting disability in the long term. And not one restaurant would do it because the amount of lost time being in the court is still more expensive than paying off the lawsuit. There is no ADA issue, even though people will bring it up. In Santa Barbara, they said you can't get insurance and it's easy to get. There is opposition out there, and the biggest opposition at the moment, and something we're going to talk about in the Home Cook 2021 virtual conference on December 13th, is the resistance that's coming from cities. So it's not all cities, and it's interesting that the resistance is south of the Grapevine. I have since found that the League of California Cities has regional listservs, and the one for Southern Cal has been sharing these fears, and they're not getting to the other cities. So on our list of supporters, I told Mayor Klein from Sunnyvale, who wanted to write a letter, wait until we're a little more organized. He wants it for Sunnyvale. Can I have Sunnyvale opt in without the county? Sorry, you can't. So some cities are very gung-ho, they want this. Others, mostly south of the Grapevine, are raising all these issues. These issues have popped up in Sonoma County, which was very favorable until they started worrying about all of these things. We're working through them because we either have or we're getting answers that most of these concerns are not playing out. They're not happening. Yes, you can worry about things, but if we can show you that they're not happening, then stop harping on them, please. Okay. Any questions on nuisance type issues? All right. Other issues, and we've talked about these a little bit. Grease is a big issue for a lot of entities. The sanitation in city and county cannot require a grease trap, but when you educate people to grease traps, they all get them. If they are doing anything with a lot of oil, of those first 250 MEHKOs, 6 are deep frying, and all 6 have grease traps. This can be handled with education, but it is a great concern to various sanitation departments. Restaurants in competition, and we're finding these businesses are very different. It's America, we have to deal with competition. Most of the world does. You can't stop another restaurant of the same kind, another sandwich shop, another Chinese restaurant, another pizzeria from opening on your block. These businesses are different. They are capped for safety and nuisance. We're finding a lot of them are ethnic restaurants, but there's something interesting going on. Many ethnic restaurants that have to do, a brick and mortar will usually do 300 covers per week. The max here is 60 and more common is 30. When you have to do 300 covers per week in a brick and mortar restaurant, you become fusion because you need a wide enough market. You Americanize the ethnic cuisine. When you only have 30 and you're marketing to your community, 40% of our mailing list are immigrants and children of immigrants, and they're opening ethnic restaurants. And they're not going fusion because at that size. So you have an ethnic Persian restaurant that is making things that are close enough to what would happen in Iran that the American who goes to the Persian restaurant downtown doesn't necessarily recognize them. They haven't been Americanized. And the Subway restaurant said it's unfair competition. Excuse me. Well, I didn't have to. I had to put in a hand washing sink, and they don't. They have to stop at $50,000, and you don't. They can have one full-time employee. You can have as many as you want. different guardrails for different businesses. The competition is not unfair. Landlords is an issue. There's nothing in the law that says you have to or not have to do anything with landlords. San Mateo has said you need to have a letter of approval from your landlord if you're a renter. Other people in Alameda have said, we have so many abusive landlords in poor sections, lower income sections of West Oakland. The landlords aren't going to let them do this. I feel for you, but it's beyond what the law was able to do, and the local jurisdiction could require something or not require it. As somebody who's been a lifelong renter, something of this size, you should ask your landlord, and if they don't want you to do it, you probably shouldn't, because you're going to end up in a combative situation with them. There are going to be issues that we have to address in the future, and landlord is one that hasn't been big enough that we've had to dive in. But yeah, we believe education is a big thing. So educating landlords is an obvious extension.
Yeah,
Absolutely
yeah.
right. All right, so last page. What do we do to get this passed? Okay. So, creating a local advocates group. Many of our counties have one. A few counties, it's been a single person who comes to my bi-weekly calls, which Emily has joined a few times. This is a team effort. We need a group of advocates who are going to talk to the decision makers, work with the decision makers. Who are the decision makers? The primary decision makers are the 5 county supervisors. This either needs a resolution, which is the simplest thing, which says we adopt the law as it is, or an ordinance. We adopt the law and we are going to put in a few extra guidelines as we're allowed to put them in. But either way, one of the 5 supervisors needs to be a champion, and 3 of the 5 of them need to vote yes when it is called up. Even if you have a champion, you are now in a political campaign. There will be opposition. We talked on the previous 3 pages about what the opposition is. Some health departments, former DEH head here was the most opposed health department in the state. He has moved on. Is Rochelle still interim health department, or is if they hired a permanent?
I'm sorry, who?
Who's the interim?
Oh, I think it's Michael.
Michael.
Well, he's Michael Ballet for the county.
Has he taken?
He's taking over.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know Michael. The interim Rochelle I had met. The health department is employed by the supervisors who are doing the vote. He or she gets a big voice. The supervisor gets the ultimate decision. But if the health department is opposed, then that leads to a large conversation. Everything we have said in the last 45 minutes or so can be said in front of the supervisor to the other decision makers while the health department or whomever is saying opposite things, and then we weigh the decision. So we have seen where nervous health department people have been convinced by their supervisors. Riverside did it. It's happening anyway. We can make it safer. We can have that discussion. Cities may be an issue. We know that Sunnyvale is going to come out in favor of us, but there are 16 incorporated cities, and what are the other 15 going to say? I haven't asked. They didn't ask Sunnyvale, they asked me. Will restaurants come out, and we have to have that argument? Will there be opposition? There will be. There always has been. Even when we have a champion who comes to us, like Supervisor Crandall in Lake County, calls me up and says, help me implement this. Sure. Other people then, knowing that he wanted it and I was helping him, said, but we can't do it. There will be opposition, and so it's a political campaign. And so we need to take the kinds of things I've told you, the studies that we have, and we need to get organizations. Nonprofits are important, so we have Vegilution saying we want this. We need to get other nonprofits, the local slow food chapter, possibly Committee for Green Foothills, although food is a stretch for them. Just thinking out loud. They have to honestly believe that this is good for the local economy, and I think they will. We need to get individuals who are willing to speak. Anybody who's currently doing this illegal will be nervous to come out in public because now they're on the radar. Some will anyway. We had 30 speakers at the San Diego Board of Supervisors meeting. 29 were pro, 1 against, and she also described something which wasn't illegal, and I said that as I came after her. Oh, if it was legal, we could help you stop that. Luck of the draw that I came after her. 22 of the 29 were would-be cooks. Many of them wouldn't break the law, so they were waiting. A few of them said, we're already doing this. One of them had been shut down and wanted to restart. We need cooks who say they want to do this, but we also need advocates. My thought, 29 was overkill. But we have 10 ready to go. 7 cooks who tell different stories, and 3 advocates. Me, finally in my home county, maybe one of you too, and then maybe somebody from Slow Food or another nonprofit, or who are willing to tell the kind of stories. We typically get 2 minutes apiece in a Board of Supervisors meeting, but tell the kind of stories that I am telling you today on the record in a public meeting. We're not going to get this opportunity unless we have one of the supervisors as a champion who puts it on the agenda. And so we will be having her or his back telling the stories. Supervisor Chavez wants to be the champion, and here are 10 of my supporters to tell you different perspectives. Some of them want to be MEHKOs. And we will each take our 2 minutes, and we will give backing to the supervisor who wants this to happen. So what we're doing today is kicking off a public campaign. And we took a look at Santa Clara County in 2019, and we didn't have anybody who was ready to be a champion. It was new. We had the old environmental health, who was a very outspoken opponent. We had other counties starting with Riverside who wanted to do it, and we are a very small nonprofit. We have to work elsewhere. We are opportunistic in many ways on where we work. We'll come back to Santa Clara County, and here we are.